out Qasem Soleimani, the leader of Iran's elite Quds force. Soleimani oversaw the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' foreign military operations, supporting U.S.-designated terror groups in Lebanon, propping up the Assad regime in Syria, and spreading Iranian military influence in Iraq.
Qasem Soleimani was the second most powerful man in Iran. No military commander, no politician had the power that he had.
The world is now waiting to see whether Iran will retaliate, with its leaders threatening a crushing response.
We are very likely looking at is a series of tit-for-tat escalations and asymmetric strikes that probably won't be limited to Iraq or to the Middle East.
U.S. President Donald Trump appeared to call for talks and also jab Iran in a tweet Friday, saying Iran never won a war but never lost a negotiation.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
The U.S. deployed an additional 750 troops to the region earlier this week, and defense officials tell VOA the rest of those troops' brigade, some 3,000 soldiers, will deploy to the Middle East in the coming hours. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
Forces, and may have well been the site where we're also conducting a lot of training of Iraqi forces as we also continue our operations to drive out and destroy the residuals of ISIS still operating in Iraq.
Now, we are learning that President Trump and Vice President Pence have been briefed on these attacks. What can you tell us about what might be going on at the White House right now in the Trump administration? What sort of possible responses are being weighed?
Well, there's also reports that Secretary of State Pompeo and the SecDef Esper have also gone to the White House. And obviously the president, to some degree, painted himself into a corner by his rhetoric already, by vowing even in advance of this in the last couple of days that any attack on American forces in the region would be considered an attack by Iran and elicit a massive American response. Well, now that attack has occurred and the Iranians are taking clear credit for it, so it's hard for me to believe that the president can ignore that particular response. That being said, we now have been once again and continue to be on an escalatory spiral that has been going on for the last couple of weeks, beginning with the killing of that American contractor at a base in northern Iraq, subsequently followed by U.S. airstrikes, and then subsequently followed by that by the killing of Qasem Soleimani. The Iranians now have responded to the killing of Soleimani. So now we're into the third move in this immediate crisis. Does the administration want to continue to escalate and move the nation closer to outright overt war with Iran? Or does it want to seek some way to try to de-escalate this crisis and try to bring things back down and hopefully find some effort to move towards a diplomatic political solution? That's the question they're going to be asking each other.
And Jeffrey, it also seems like the president is going to have to sort of deal with two conflicting impulses, which is one, the last thing that he wants or anyone else wants at this point is another Iraq war, right? To see lots of troops being, heading to the Middle East to fight. At the same time, like you said, there is a rhetoric that has almost put him in a box and sort of made increased aggression inevitable. So how do you balance those two conflicting impulses?
Yeah, that's where the president's going to have to try to find a way to thread that needle. And don't forget, this is the guy who ran on a platform of reducing U.S. military presence in the region, which resonated very largely with his base, number one. And number two, now we see that particular effort expanding. One could also say, however, cynically, at this particular moment, the president might also think that distracting American attention away from an impeachment trial that he's about to undergo in the next few days might be a reason to continue up the escalatory ladder. I certainly hope that is not true, but I'm sure some people will suggest that. But last but not least, many people argue that this is a crisis
which stages attacks on its soil. The missile strikes hit targets in Deir el-Zor in eastern Syria. 18 people were killed in Iran after gunmen stormed the parliament and attacked a holy shrine in Tehran. Syria's 6-year-long civil war has now evolved into an international conflict, drawing in many nations. The US, Britain, Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have all carried. Iran says it has fired missiles at an Islamic State base in Syria in retaliation for attacks by the extremist group last week. Iran also warned that it would strike any group which stages attacks on its soil. The missile strikes hit targets in Deir el-Zor in eastern Syria. 18 people were killed in Iran after gunmen stormed the parliament and attacked a holy shrine in Tehran. Syria's 6-year-long civil war has now evolved into an international conflict, drawing in many nations. The US, Britain, Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have all carried out airstrikes on Syrian territory. More than 300,000 people have been killed, and the fight.
We are going to get to some breaking news out of the Middle East, where CBS is carrying a live report right now on the latest developments happening there. We understand that Iran state TV says Tehran has launched tens of missiles at an airbase in Iraq. So let's go to it right now.
That a rocket attack was launched against the Al-Assad airbase northwest of Baghdad a short time ago. One administration official says there are no reports of casualties. About 6 rockets were launched. There are also apparently an attack on the U.S. consulate in Erbil, in northern Iraq. In that case, 2 rockets were supposedly launched, and there are no reports of casualties in that attack either. Earlier, Iranian state television announced that its Revolutionary Guards were conducting a missile attack on Al-Assad air base in retaliation for the drone strike which killed Qasem Soleimani. So Iran, the government of Iran, appears to be taking credit for this attack. If that is correct, then this was not just another rocket attack by a Iranian-backed militia in Iraq, which may or may not have been acting on its own. This, according to that announcement by Iranian state TV, would be an attack ordered by the government of Iran against a base where U.S. troops are located.
In fact, and that's an important, right, and that's an important point, David, that you point out, because some of these rocket attacks have been carried out by proxy forces in the past, but we are now hearing from the IRGC that their aerospace unit launched this attack with tens of ballistic missiles on the Al-Assad military base in the name of martyr General Soleimani. So they are claiming responsibility. And of course, this follows the news reporting that the Ayatollah, Iran's supreme leader, has said that he wanted Iran's forces to carry out such an attack.
They're using the word missiles, which is significant, because they have missiles which have sufficient range to reach Baghdad and west of Baghdad from Iranian territory. We don't have this confirmed yet, but it is entirely possible that this missile attack was actually launched from Iranian territory, not just ordered from Iranian territory.
Iran's Fars news agency reports Iran has fired 6 missiles at the Ain al-Assad base in western Iraq. It's released this photo purportedly showing 1 missile being fired from Iran. The base is home to Iraqi and US armed forces. Fox News reports senior US military figures have confirmed a base was hit by either short-range ballistic missiles or cruise missiles. The apparent attack is believed to be in response to the United States assassination of top Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has spoken with the Chief of the Defence Force and Foreign Affairs Minister following reports of the attack. This is a developing story, and we will bring you more details when they do come to hand.
The United States is not seeking a war with Iran, but we are prepared to finish one.
Defense Secretary Mark Esper says he expects Iran to retaliate for the killing of their general Qasem Soleimani. He adds the U.S. wants a diplomatic solution, but it's on Iran to de-escalate.
We're not the ones that have escalated this over the past arguably 40 years and certainly over the past several months. It's been Iran through its proxies.
The administration says when the president decided to have Soleimani killed, an Iranian attack on American interests was believed to be just days away.
If you're looking for imminence, you needn't look no further than the days that led up to the strike that was taken against Soleimani. Series of tactical actions by the president in the absence of a strategy are in the makings of a tragedy that the president has made.
The defense secretary also says our military is not pulling out of Iraq. Sunday, Iraq's parliament voted to expel U.S. troops from the country. However, the decision is not official until the prime minister signs off.
If we leave, that would mean that Iran would have a much bigger foothold, and the people of Iraq do not want to see Iran running the company.
The U.S. has to leave Iraq. What's going to happen? It's going to embolden Iran, and it's going to lead to the resurgence of ISIS.
We have received widespread support for our actions from our allies and partners in the region, and we will continue to work with them to protect our gains against ISIS. I've been in constant communication with my counterparts and have called on them to stand with us in the defense of coalition forces in Iraq. Working through NATO, the Defeat ISIS coalition, and with our partners on the ground, we continue to bolster Iraqi institutions to ensure the lasting defeat of ISIS. As we defend our people and interests, let me reiterate that the United States is not seeking a war with Iran, but we are prepared to finish one. We are seeking a diplomatic solution, but first, this will require Iran to de-escalate. It will require the regime to come to the table with the goal of preventing further bloodshed. And it will require them to cease their malign activities throughout the region. As I've said, we are open to having this discussion with them, but we are just as prepared
to... So the Iranian official media says that the Revolutionary Guard is claiming responsibility. They also are putting out video, which they say are some of the rockets that were fired apparently from Iran at a U.S. airbase here in Iraq, the Al-Assad airbase. Military sources say that they took at least 6 rounds of what they described as rockets initially, that soldiers on the base took shelter in bunkers. If you look at the video, you can see at least 3 projectiles and hear the distinctive noise of what sound like jet engines. This would be a significant escalation. U.S. bases in this country sometimes come under attack from small rockets, but not long-range or medium-range ballistic missiles fired from Iran. The Iranian news agencies are also saying they're issuing threats, not just claiming responsibility, saying that there could be more attacks to come if the United States responds, and that Americans, they say, are advised to return to their bases and return home for their safety. So Iran definitely claiming credit and linking this explicitly to the killing of the General Qasem Soleimani, saying that this is part of Iran's revenge. They are putting out hashtags on social media saying decisive revenge, Lester.
And Richard, what do we know about the American presence at that base? How many, what the mission of the troops is there?
It is a very large base, and actually right now we can hear some helicopters above us right now. There were some explosions that we heard here in Erbil, where I am in northern Iraq. We are still trying to figure out what that was. So far, no word of casualties at the Assad Air Base, but I can tell you that a lot of military sources that I've been speaking to are very busy right now. They do not appear to be answering their phones. They're clearly working this story. The White House says that the president has been informed and is meeting with national security advisors. Not sure if this is over, if this was an initial assault, if this was Iran testing the waters, but it certainly got a lot of people's attention here with a rocket attack that Iran is claiming from the Revolutionary Guard, saying that it is part of revenge for the killing of the commander of Iranian Black Ops, Qasem Soleimani.
Any word on any casualties from this?
So far, we have not heard any word of casualties, only that troops were taking shelter in this base. It is a very large base. It is quite far, about 200 miles from the Iranian border. These bases are full of places where troops can take cover. So it would be very difficult for these kind of missiles, which do not have any kind of significant guidance system, as far as we know, to hit anything specific. But as far as we know, no casualties, and we're not aware of damage. There may have been damage. We just frankly don't know at this stage.
All right, Richard Engel in Iraq. We'll ask you to stand by. We want to go to the Pentagon now. Correspondent Courtney Cubie Courtney, what are you hearing from U.S. military sources about the size and nature of this attack?
So we're hearing so far that there were at least 3 separate barrages of incoming. But what remains unclear is exactly what it was. The original reports were that they were rockets, that the U.S. military there on this base were hunkered down. They were in bunkers for this original round, which was reported as 6 rockets. But then the incoming kept coming. There was another round that came through. That was when things became a little bit fuzzier, Lester, is exactly what it was that was coming in. You know, Richard mentioned the distance between al-Assad and Iran. The military there were saying that they believed that this was coming in from the direction of Iran. Was it actually from inside Iran or not?
That would Prime Minister, the President, and I would expect the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well.
Within that relationship between Donald Trump and Mr. Pompeo, I mean, clearly Mr. Pompeo gives Mr. Trump exactly what Mr. Trump wants. Is Mr. Esper more of a moderating influence when it comes to the reality of what free-range Donald Trump may want to do because it looks good on the TV channels, it looks good on Fox, it plays well to the base?
Well, I don't even need to respond to that because you've already asked the question and answered yourself. I do not believe that Mike Pompeo, who I've known for many, many years, is a sock puppet of President Trump. He was a CIA director at the very time that Donald Trump was saying, I don't believe the intelligence. Mike Pompeo was one of the biggest anti-Trumpers during the campaign trail. I don't think they necessarily have a relationship, as you would suggest, where Mike Pompeo simply parrots and feeds back the president what he wants to hear.
OK, Mr. Kimmitt, for the moment, thanks very much. You're watching Al Jazeera and our continuing coverage of developing news out of Iraq. More than a dozen ballistic missiles have been fired at U.S. facilities in Iraq. At least 2 Iraqi air bases were targeted, one in Erbil and the other one at the Ain al-Assad air base in the province of Anbar. Iran state TV says the Revolutionary Guards launched tens of surface-to-surface missiles. The U.S. Assistant to the Secretary of Defense issued a statement. It confirms Iran launched more than a dozen ballistic missiles against U.S. military and coalition forces in Iraq. It is clear that these missiles were launched from Iran and targeted at least 2 Iraqi military bases, hosting U.S. military and coalition personnel at al-Assad and Erbil. The statement goes on to say, we will take all necessary measures to protect and defend U.S. personnel, partners and allies in the region. We're in conversation with Mark Kimmitt, formerly an Assistant Secretary for Political Military Affairs under the George W. Bush administration. He joins us from Washington. So we're pretty clear on what they feel their options might be, Mark Kimmitt. Will there be pause for thought in the White House right now as they're having that meeting in the Situation Room as to the optics around a tit-for-tat situation? That can change, that can descend into being something completely different very quickly.
Well, it certainly can, but when you talk about the optics, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Iranians fired their missiles at exactly the same time that the missile was fired at Qasem Soleimani. So there's obviously some optics being worked on both sides. The photo of the senior Iranian officials looking at the screen as the Iranian missiles were being fired. So I think both sides understand that optics are important here, that you're not only trying to achieve a military target, but you're also trying to get a message out. So I think it's happening on both sides.
Is that why they went for an airbase that Donald Trump himself visited in December of 2018, do you think?
It could well be. All presidents have visited Assad. I was with President Bush when he visited Assad in, I believe it was 2007. So that is a very large concentration. But I think it's also important to understand that it is among the furthest bases west inside of Iraq. It could also be a very clear signal to the Israelis that they have the reach, that they're not just firing at bases near Baghdad, but they're reaching all the way across Baghdad, Iraq. And if they can reach all the way across Iraq, they can reach all the way into Israel.
Can I ask you one final question, Mr. Kimmitt, relating to or pertaining to Mr. Trump's news conference inside the Oval Office a little earlier today? Not directly specifically to what we're discussing now, and because that is maybe still ongoing. But when he talked about how we have eradicated ISIL from Iraq, he didn't go on to flesh that out, because the reality is that, yes, the US-led coalition in Iraq eradicated, by and large, ISIL from its strongholds up and down Iraq. Arguably, they're regrouping in places like the southern half of Libya. But he should have gone on, should he not, can I suggest you, to say, with the help of the militia on the ground in Iraq. And some of the analysts we were talking to last Friday into Saturday were saying, well, there was a revolving door relationship between the militia that worked for Qasem Soleimani and the other militia that the United States was working with to get rid of ISIL.
Well, I think we can be more specific than that. We had a relationship with the PMFs through the Iraqi security forces. We would not provide air support for the PMFs. We would not provide equipment directly to the PMF, but obviously the Iraqi security forces did. So nobody's taking away from the PMFs valor and heroics on the battlefield against ISIS. They were the first to the battlefield after the fatwa from Najaf, far sooner than the reconstructed and reformulated Iraqi security forces. So we shouldn't take away from the PMFs their valor on the battlefield or their accomplishments on the battlefield. It's not the fight against ISIS that is relevant. It is what they've done in the post-fight against ISIS that is relevant.